Welcome to ACF Chefs Forum. Now, more than ever, it's important for culinarians to connect, to share, and to offer inspiration and mentorship, which is exactly why we're excited to have experts here with information just for you, the leaders and future leaders of the food service industry. I'm Jackie Pressinger, American Culinary Federation's Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to a very sweet webinar and appreciate you tuning in for this exciting demonstration. I hope you're ready to be inspired and to learn more about pastry. I know I can't wait. It's almost Valentine's Day. During this presentation, we will be taking questions for Chef live during the webinar as we are able. Please be sure to use the chat function to collaborate with other chefs and students who are tuning in, and the Q&A function to pose questions directly to today's featured chef. All right, well, let's get the conversation started in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from today. And now, with more information, please welcome Jen, our friend from Massachusetts Restaurant Association Educational Foundation.
Good morning, everybody. As Jackie mentioned, I'm Jen Almeida from Massachusetts ProStart. I am so happy to welcome all of you to today's demo, and we are so excited to have such a talented pastry chef here to inspire us. Just a little background on today's featured chef. Jessica Craig started her journey to becoming a pastry chef by going to culinary school at the New York Institute of Technology. From there, she worked at a variety of establishments all over Long Island, New York, including Garden City Hotel, City Cellar Restaurant, and Nick and Tony's in East Hampton. It was at Nick and Tony's that Chef Jessica learned the most important about the seasonality and working with local farmers and sourcing ingredients. After spending years working through the ranks from pastry cook to pastry sous chef and to eventually becoming an executive pastry chef, she felt it was time to spread her wings in New York City. Chef Jessica worked for several restaurant groups and an international airline catering company, learning every step of the way, honing her craft until she landed her first New York City executive pastry chef at L'Artusi Restaurant. I think I said that right. Chef Jessica has been featured in publications and blogs such as Essence Magazine, Michelin Guide, Cuisine Noire, and Cucina Italia, just to name a few. She has also competed in shows such as Bon Appetit on Viceland and Chopped on the Food Network. Chef Craig is currently the executive pastry chef, the executive pastry chef leading the pastry and bread program for Celestine Restaurant in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Chef, on behalf of all of the culinary students who are also tuning in today, we are so thrilled to have you here with us. Now, back to Jackie to help kick things off.
All right, well, thank you very much. And before we start, I see our ACF National President, Chef Kimberly Brock Brown, is on today tuning in. Happy birthday, Chef Brock Brown. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Chef Jessica to kick off her presentation and demo. Chef, tell us more about your pastry point of view and what you'll be sharing with us today.
Sure. As mentioned, I'm pastry chef Jessica Craig, and I would also like to extend a happy birthday to Chef Brock Brown as well. Happy birthday to you, and I'm so excited that everyone's here watching. So the presentation today is about Panna Cotta. It's a simple Italian dessert, but it's been misconstrued in many different ways. It's loved by many, hated by some, and it baffles a lot of people because unfortunately, a lot of people has had a hard sell milk jello basically. So I'm going to go through quite a few things today as far as like what you should do concerning Panna Cotta and the texture that you want when you're making a Panna Cotta. So a lot of people will describe Panna Cotta as an eggless custard. In my humble opinion, it's more like its own thing, and the fact that it's a set cream basically, and it's set with gelatin, and of course there's no eggs in it. So the original recipe only calls for whole cream, vanilla, sugar, and gelatin. 4 ingredients, very simple, right? How can you mess that up? But unfortunately, a lot of people have a different idea of what it should be. Now, should it be set in a vessel and molded, or should it be set in a glass or a ramekin or a bowl, like lightly set? Everyone seems to have their own ideas to what it should be, but I'm going to give my take on what it should be. So food can be very subjective and objective. So objectively, we can agree that panna cotta is a dessert that's dairy-based and set with gelatin, right? Subjectively, we can discuss and debate how it should be flavored, what texture it should be, how it should be served, and what garnishes should go with it. So now to get into a little bit of the history of what panna cotta has always, at least originally, was meant to be. It's believed to be invented by a Hungarian woman in the early 1900s using fish gelatin. Gelatin in Italy was sometimes called colla di pesce, which is fish glue, which, okay, fine, sounds a little gross. But during that time, this was the most stable gelatin that was available during the early 1900s. Although panna cotta isn't really mentioned in cookbooks, Italian cookbooks, until maybe around 1960. But yet it's still mentioned as a very traditional dessert of the Piedmont region. So Northern Italy is known for its high quality dairy, creams, and cheeses. And with that being said, a classic Piedmontese panna cotta is served on its own, or sometimes with the classic cookie, brutti ma buoni. And I believe this is probably the beginning of calling something ugly delicious. So it translates to ugly but good. So brutti ma buoni is a hazelnut meringue cookie. So another version of the panna cotta can also be flavored with peach liqueur, served with red berry coulis. I'm pretty sure when you research panna cotta online, a lot of the times you'll see it with berries most of the time, but it's such a versatile dessert. It can be flavored and paired with so many different things. My style of pastry is very seasonal, as you'll see later on in the presentation when I finally plate a panna cotta. In New York, unlike our beautiful state of California, our seasons are very separated here and things don't necessarily flow one into the other. So unfortunately, like strawberries, peaches, things like that aren't necessarily in season right now, but I mean, we're still not at a loss because we still have apples, we still have pears, grapes, pomegranates that we can have shipped in, as well as citrus is a beautiful array of things that we can garnish a panna cotta with this time of the year. Other parts of Italy, more south of the Piedmont region, they flavor their panna cotta with rum, sweet Marsala wine. They can also drizzle caramel on top, a lot of times with chocolate. And if you think of caramel with a custard, what other desserts do we think of? Maybe a flan, a creme caramel, or even a creme brulee. So essentially, we're looking at many different cultures that play with very similar flavor profiles. So some of the flavors of panna cotta that I've done, I'll list now, and not limited to vanilla, chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, coffee, espresso. Citrus, let's separate a citrus into lemon, orange, lime. You can flavor with herbs such as thyme, mint, basil, sage. You can go a little bit more American style and do like a butterscotch, even freeze-dried fruit like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries. You could turn that into a powder, pull that into your panna cotta, and it gives it such a beautiful flavor. So now for such a simple dessert, let's break down the different parts of it. So now, when making a panna cotta, you want to use the best cream possible. I know we're living through a time right now where we're becoming very health conscious, and someone might think, oh, it might be great to use, let's say, a great milk instead of heavy cream, trying to be a little bit healthier. I wouldn't recommend that, only because the buttermilk fat content is going to be kind of low. And that's where, the bad panna cottas, like I mentioned in the beginning, comes in, where it turns out more like a jello than like a creamy, silky, smooth dessert. So essentially, the types of milks that I like to use when I'm making a panna cotta is usually like a heavy cream. I wouldn't go any lighter than a light cream. Even half and half is probably too light. You want to keep your fat content in the realm of 20% or above. And if you feel like heavy cream is too heavy, you can always add like a milk or a creme fraiche or a yogurt. If you're feeling decadent, I would say add like maybe a mascarpone cheese to it, just to give it even extra silky smoothness if you're not really looking to be too health conscious. So another ingredient that we can look at as well are sweeteners. So granulated sugar is very easy to use in most pastry contexts, right? It's purified, refined, very easy to use. We can also use a more raw sugar like turbinado sugar, muscovado sugar. Honey is great to use in a panna cotta. Maple syrup even. Just to make things a little bit more interesting, I would highly recommend use like pomegranate molasses as a sweetener. Also, try not to make your panna cotta too sweet. I think a huge thing as Americans that we tend to do is we tend to make our desserts a little too sweet. You can play around with your ratios, but definitely try to keep it a little bit on the lighter side so that maybe your accompaniments can be a little bit sweeter. Add some acid, add some bitter, just to keep it a little nuanced. Another thing to look at when you're making a panna cotta is your gelatin. Now, gelatin you can get in powdered form and sheet form. So I have this little box of not powdered gelatin. I usually don't use powdered gelatin for the simple reason that, to me, it does have a weird odor and smell to it. I know it's supposed to be odorless and all that jazz. For pastry purposes, I really do like relying on sheet gelatin or leaf gelatin, as it's sometimes called. It comes in different grades from bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. I think titanium is also another grade of gelatin. And all that refers to is just the different levels of setting. So like the higher the grade, it doesn't mean that it's better. It just means that it'll set faster and a little bit harder, depending on which sheet that you're using. I won't get too deeply into that. I do have a link that I could send at the end of the webinar that kind of goes into that a little bit more, because it can get very confusing because you're talking about percentages and a lot of different things that I'm honestly not mentally prepared to talk about right now. So with all that being said, let's get into the demo. Do we have any questions so far?
Yes, Chef, we are getting a lot of questions coming in. And one of the questions was if you have ever frozen panna cotta before, or if this is a preparation that you need to make fresh for service.
I would not recommend freezing your the panna cotta because it'll change the setting of the gelatin. It'll actually make it weaker. It'll also create like ice crystals at the top of your panna cotta, and when it defrosts, it just kind of has a weird look to it. I would not recommend making it too far in ahead. I mean, if you make it, it'll hold for about 3 to 5 days, depending on the freshness of your cream. So I would not recommend.
Okay, well, great. And then one of the other questions coming in is just about how you got your start in pastry. So feel free to pepper that into any of the conversation where you see it fits.
Oh, awesome. I'll just speak a little briefly, really quickly, and then I'll jump into the demo because it is pretty quick. But I started off on Long Island going to culinary school. I did not go to pastry school. I learned everything that I know in pastry from working at a wide variety of restaurants. Most of the restaurants that I worked at has been European, Mediterranean style restaurants, which is how I got to know so much about Italian desserts. as well as traveling to Italy a handful of times, just to see firsthand how they love to do things there. Some of the best semifreddo, panna cotta, and meringue cookies, believe it or not, are what I've had in Italy. Yeah, I started on the savory side before I moved over to pastry. I hope that answered any questions that anyone has. All right, so if you can move this camera over here. So the dessert that I'm making today is a fior di latte panna cotta. So I have my gelatin blooming here. I have my heavy cream, sweetener, and then some creme fraiche. So when referring to fior di latte, it refers to, it's translated to flower of the milk, right? And the purpose of a dessert like this, because I'm sure when you think fior di latte, it also refers to mozzarella, as well as like fior di latte gelato. So we're trying to highlight the beauty of the cream and the creme fraiche and just the beautiful, delicious flavor that we have here. So actually, I'm going to pour a little bit of this out. I shouldn't have put all of this in here. We want just enough just to melt the sugar and to dissolve our gelatin. So we're going to put all the sugar, and there's a pinch of salt in here as well. I like to season all of my desserts. Seasoning your desserts is just as important as seasoning your savory food. So we're just going to get this to dissolve. And honestly, as soon as this gets hot, I'm going to wring out the gelatin, get that in, and then whisk in the rest of the heavy cream. Do we have any more questions in the chat?
Yes, chef. Well, first of all, a lot of these chefs are requesting your recipe at the end, so we'll see if chef's able to share that with us. The other question that's coming in is some of the chefs are wondering if there's an alternative for any vegetarian or vegans. I think some people are saying that they have tried agar in the past or some alternative milks. I didn't know if in your experience you've ever made this vegan friendly.
I have not. However, whoever mentioned agar is right on point. You can use agar, although it sets a little hard. I would mix my agar with a little bit of maybe locust bean gum or guar gum, just something a little bit softer, so it doesn't set as hard. I think oat milk is a great option, as well as coconut. Coconut's super creamy and decadent. If you're, leaning to more of a dietary restriction. All right, I'm going to wring out my gelatin here. And turn off this heat. Now, we don't want the gelatin to get too hot because above the temperature of 212, I believe it is, it will no longer set the way that we want it to. All right, that looks like it's dissolved. So I'm going to add in the creme fraiche first. And then I'll add in the heavy cream, just to make sure that our creme fraiche melts well into this first before we add in the rest of the heavy cream. And also not heating up all of your milks or creams or whatever you're choosing to use. Keeps the milk flavor a lot fresher. And also it'll help for your panna cotta to set faster. And I personally love this particular panna cotta, which is why I chose not to do this one and not necessarily flavor it with any vanilla. And you can see it's getting like a beautiful silky texture. All right. That cream in there. And it's important that we scrape out every bit, right? We don't want any waste. Talking a lot about waste these days. I'm just gonna give that a gentle stir because we're not necessarily looking for bubbles. We just want everything to just incorporate well. All right, and that a panna cotta is truly that simple. So what I'm gonna do is pour this back into here so that I can pour this into the vessels that I'm gonna use. Okay. All right, so I brought a variety of things to set the panna cotta in. So now as far as serving it, it all depends on what you're trying to do. You might want a more of a blank canvas for plating. You might want, you know, a glass that someone can see all the different layers of what you're trying to do. I think this glass here is a little bit more old school. But I thought this was a fun variety for us to play with as far as plating goes. So just gonna pour. Yeah, we can use that. Trying my best not to be messy here. It was about. All right. And for consistency's sake, like if this was more of a restaurant setting, of course I would be scaling, you know, all the different portions, but this is just for a presentation, so this is fine. All right, so we're gonna put this in the refrigerator to set. And of course, being careful not to tip or spill. All right. And by way of TV magic, they've set. Look at that. Look how fast that was. Do you have any more questions coming in?
Oh, yes, many. So one of the other questions was about where do you gain your inspiration for new dishes, for new pastry menu items, and also if you could perhaps describe a day in the life of Chef Craig when it comes to your work and what you have to do to get the restaurant set for service.
Sure. So my inspiration comes from travel, which unfortunately haven't been able to do too much of that these days. It also comes from going out to eat. Maybe a song that I've heard, maybe I watched a movie. You know what I mean? Like I truly reach out for inspiration from many, many sources. Sometimes it's my cooks at work, you know what I mean? My cooks have awesome ideas sometimes. It comes from a variety of sources. I consider myself a pretty creative person, and it just depends on that. And also seasonality matters a lot to me as well. So it depends on what season it is. Of course, as soon as spring hits, it's a lot more inspirational with, you know, strawberries, rhubarb, and beautiful blossoms that comes out. But that part of it totally depends. But a day in the life, every day is very different. But I usually show up to Celestine Restaurant. A lot of times my cooks get there before I do, and I'll check in on what they're doing. I'll check emails. You know, it just truly depends. Sometimes I'm recipe developing, sometimes I'm typing recipes, sometimes I'm food costing. It truly depends on the day, but I honestly bounce between Celestine and Grand Army Bar, where I also do their dessert program as well. So sometimes I'm in touch with that chef and, you know, discussing menu ideas and executing those things as well. So I have here a variety of toppings for this panna cotta. And in with seasonality in mind, I have some poached pears, I have some fresh pomegranate, I have navel orange as well as blood orange that it's truly just the oranges in their own juices, and some tarragon here. I have some grape compote made with like a red variety of cotton candy grapes. I have fresh tarragon to play with, some toasted almonds, toasted hazelnuts, some flaxseed granola, some toasted vanilla meringue, and I also have some citrus peel here, as well as some lemon curd. So, oh, and I also have apple gelée. I went to town. So what are we gonna do here? So when you're coming up with a plating, and not just for panna cotta, for anything that you're doing, you wanna think about different flavor combinations. You wanna think about different textures, temperatures. You know, like I wouldn't recommend throwing anything hot on top of here because your panna cotta is gonna melt. But, you know, you might want to use, let's say, a granita. Granita is a great addition to something like this. Think about your color contrast, as well as, you know, like a crunch, you know, on top of a soft. These are all things that you want to think about when you're coming up with a plating. So leave their spoons here. I'm going to start playing around with this a little bit and do a few varieties of different things. I'm a weirdo who likes to plate with a fork sometimes, because then the juices don't get everywhere. Spoons. All right. So first, I think I'm gonna start with this glass here. And I think I'll do like some lemon curd in here. So I'm just gonna start with a few dots in there, right? And you also want to think about your negative space, right? So I don't want to fill everything up. I want to be able to see the panna cotta a little bit. So I'm just going to keep my piping to the one side there. I'm going to grab these tweezers and I will bring this closer. All right, so the blood oranges are looking very beautiful, right? So I'm just going to add a few of those pieces in there. And then the navel oranges, grab some of that beautiful red color from soaking overnight. And also the tarragon that I've chopped in here also infuses a great flavor. I actually got the inspiration from this from a dessert we're actually doing at Grand Army Bar right now. All right. Then I think I'm gonna add a bit of meringue on here. Just a little bit, just to kind of contrast and give it a little crunch, right? Because these are all definitely things you should be thinking about when you're plating. And then I will add a little bit of chopped hazelnut, because that's also an additional cool crunch that we can have on here. And then just a few leaves of tarragon. So tarragon is an herb I truly don't use that often. It's a great alternative to mint, because we shouldn't just be throwing mint on everything, right? Like, our garnishes should make sense to what it is that we're plating. And I also like to work in odd numbers. So as you saw, I put 3 dots of the lemon curd. I'm putting 3 sprigs of the tarragon on there. Also, odd numbers are believed to be lucky. So I all these weird things in the back of my head as far as when I'm plating. So that'll be our first one. All right, as far as that goes. This one's more open facing. So I'm actually going to play around with some of the other fruit on this one. Let's put some pear on here. So this pear has been poached in a little bit of apple cider, as well as some lemon and citrus. I'd like to also put some of this apple jelly, since it is a little delicate. Let's see if it'll be nice to me. I'll actually use my finger. There you go. And I'll put one more at the end. So now we have the contrasting colors of the pear, the apple. The apple jelly makes sense because I did use apple cider to cook those pears through. And I honestly think that the almonds would be great on here, because I think that'll be a great texture and flavor contrast to what we have going on. And I'm gonna add just a few dots of this grape compote that I have here. Right now, again, with a plating like this, we want the panna cotta to be the focal point, and then we're kind of working around that. And I'm just gonna add a few pomegranate seeds, because I think that will also be a nice texture contrast, as well as some nice color. All right. So those are our first 2 platings. Do we have any more questions coming in?
Yes, chef. And by the way, this is all looking fabulous. I wish I was there with you. One of the questions that has come in from several of the viewers is, how long does the panna cotta take to set, say if you're using one of those smaller ramekins?
Oh, yes. So the panna cotta should set. It honestly depends on how hot your mixture has gotten, but I would recommend setting it for at least 4 hours, just to make sure that it's like as set as it should be. And it also depends on, are you home versus a commercial kitchen? Commercial kitchen, I would say 4 hours. If you're home, I would say 6 to 8 hours.
Sounds wonderful. And with the gelée, what were the ingredients or the method behind preparing that as a garnish?
Oh, yes. As I mentioned before about the agar and using a different type of gum when setting. So with this apple gelée, I used apple cider, lemon juice, some sugar, and agar, as well as, guar gum. is in there as well as the setting agents. So when working with agar, it doesn't necessarily have to bloom the same way that gelatin needs to bloom. So what you're going to do is just bring your liquids up to a boil, have your guar gum as well as agar whisked in with your sugar, and then just shimmy that in and whisk it in and let it simmer on a medium simmer for, I want to say, 3 to 5 minutes, just to make sure that everything has dissolved properly. Kind of having fun here. Okay, so on this particular bowl, we have a lot of space and a lot of area space to play with. So what I'm going to do is pipe my lemon curd. Instead of 3 dollops, I'm going to go with 5. And I'm going to kind of work with this corner of the plate. And again, you don't have to do it this way. Maybe you might want to, do a little something all around. I like the idea of kind of keeping the focal point on one side and leaving a blank canvas on the other. It totally is up to you. It's your jam. And over time, you'll develop your own style. So, I mean, there is no hard and fast rules when it comes to plating. It truly is dependent upon what you're trying to achieve and the story you're trying to tell. So we have our lemon curd here. I think this time we're going to go back to the citrus again. I'm going to lay some out and maybe kind of alternate between the 2 different types of citrus.
Chef, and one of the questions coming in is if you're adding chocolate or any of the other flavorings, how would you do that when, or what would that do to change the preparation?
Yes, so if you're adding a chocolate, your ratios may change a little bit because you're increasing the fat content. So I would recommend maybe adding a small bit of milk. Also, you want to add your chocolate in the beginning step when you saw I was heating up the sugar and the small bit of cream just to get everything dissolved. That's a great moment to add in your chocolate. Make sure your ingredients are nice and hot because you want your chocolate to dissolve. And in that case, I would highly also recommend straining it after so you don't have any like chocolate bits left inside of the panna cotta. All right, we're gonna play with the granola a little bit. Kind of give it a little bit of a breakfast vibe, a little bit, brunch, maybe. All right, gonna add a few leaves of tarragon to this one. As well as some tuile. I think the tuile would be beautiful on here. So I also have the citrus tuile that kind of has like a lacy texture to it. And we're going to give this a little bit of height and dimension. Maybe a little guy right in the front. All right, something a little different and dynamic. And last but not least, we have this little guy here. So I think I would like to focus more on the pears and the grapes on this one, this last one. And also keep in mind when you're doing a plating, like you want, of course, what you're plating to make sense, as well as in a restaurant setting, when they go to pick up the plate, I personally, if I'm coming up with a new plating, I'll pick it up and I'll move it around. Like, will your garnishes fall? You know what I mean? Like, is it functional? We all like to see a really tall slice of cake, but if someone goes to grab that slice of cake and you have, you know, your cake falling over every time a server grabs it, that means you might want to rethink your plate and how it's being plated. I'll take another question.
Absolutely. All right. Do you have a most requested dessert on your menu? And do you have any favorite pastry or pastry memory?
Thankfully, where I'm at Celestine, there isn't necessarily a most requested thing because the desserts like change seasonally. At the moment, it's actually kind of funny because we were talking about it, like things have kind of been all over the place in such a way that it just depends on the night. Like one night we'll sell a lot of the coffee cake, another night we'll sell a lot of the chocolate semifreddo, another night we might sell a bunch of our banoffee dessert that's on the menu right now. It truly depends. Like I feel like with the pandemic especially, there hasn't been much of a rhyme or reason as of late. But for me, I love ice cream. I love making ice cream. I love eating ice cream. It's probably one of the most versatile things that you can make. Like the flavor options are endless, and I'm a sucker for anything with banana.
Yes, you had me at banoffee, believe me. That sounds fabulous. This is all looking absolutely beautiful. One of the other chefs has written in with the question, is this formula stable enough that if you flipped it out of these bowls or ramekins that it would hold its shape?
Not necessarily. You can set it a little bit harder with a touch more gelatin. Like this particular recipe will yield you about a quart of Panna Cotta base. And for this quart, there's only 3 sheets of gelatin. So for that, I would recommend maybe bumping it up to 4 or maybe even 4.5 if that's what you're looking to do. But this particular recipe, I wouldn't recommend trying to unmold it because I'm kind of biased in the way that I like Panna Cotta in a vessel, and I don't necessarily like to unmold it personally.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of these dishes are looking absolutely spectacular. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat right now, which is wonderful. And then I guess just to touch on the other seasons, and I know you have done this throughout the presentation too, but if there was a presentation that you'd recommend for any other seasons, what might that look like?
Oh, for sure. I have definitely done a chamomile flavored Panna Cotta or even a basil flavored Panna Cotta. That goes amazing with like strawberries, as well as pretty much any berry. That would make like a great like frutti di bosco style kind of thing. Later in the summer, peaches are great with like more like a rose flower water flavor. I know like flowers are very polarizing when it comes to dessert because everyone's like, oh, it tastes like soap, but like a tasteful amount is really not the end of the world, and it actually can be quite delicious just using a small touch of like a flower water.
Absolutely. Great advice. And for the culinary students who are tuning in today, do you have any advice for any of the aspiring chefs who might be watching you and excited to be where you are someday?
For sure. I would say whether it be in school or your initial internship, externship, your initial jobs, absorb as much as you can. You have these chefs and tools available to you, and for sure, just reach out snatch as much information, as much tips as possible. As you get a little bit further in the industry, I think my number one tip to any beginning chef is to remember to take care of yourself.
That's huge. Thank you so much for that. Very, very important. And one of the other chefs who was tuning in was wondering if you had any book or books that you recommend for those who are interested in pastry.
Oh, for someone starting out, I think Baking Illustrated is amazing because it will troubleshoot a lot of desserts and baking issues that you might come up with in the beginning of your career. I personally love Dory Greenspan's books. Literally any of them. Beginning of my career, I reached into her books for inspiration concerning, cookies, scones. Like a lot of my brunch ideas came straight out of her book. We all got to start somewhere, right? But those two books I think I would highly recommend for someone who's starting out.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds great. Any other final thoughts or anything that you would like to share about your presentation or in general to the chefs and culinary students who are tuning in today? Just absolutely fabulous presentation. So very appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you walked away with a better idea of what a panna cotta should look like. I also feel like maybe I should dig into one just so you can kind of see the texture
Yes.
when when you eat a panna cotta. So it should definitely be more on the creamy side. Like you see that it's not super stiff, and it should be, creamy. You shouldn't have like a hard set, like how I have this here and it has the straight edges. You shouldn't have straight edges with a panna cotta. It should be super creamy and delicious.
Well, that looks absolutely delicious. Again, I'm jealous that I'm not out there with you, but again, we certainly appreciate you sharing your skills, your talent, and your time with us today for sure. This has just been absolutely wonderful, and to see you in action has just been really, really great. So thank you very, very much. We hope that we'll see you again at ACF events and or at ACF webinars very soon. So a huge round of applause as we thank Chef Jessica Craig. Again, thank you for sharing your enthusiasm for pastry with our culinary community of professionals and culinary students today. And we hope that everyone will be on the lookout. You'll receive this recording tomorrow. And if Chef is able to give us the recipe, we'll include that tomorrow as well when we send you a little bit of wrap up. Make sure you take the survey, let us know what you think, and in order to earn your 1 hour of ACF continuing education hours. So we hope that you'll join us for our next webinar, which will be February 17th, as we explore the latest techniques for breakfast and brunch with certified master chef Gerald Ford. And please do join us in Orlando for the can't miss event, one-day event, the Advanced Culinary Summit on March 10th, hosted at Rosen College at University of Central Florida. You don't want to miss the amazing opportunity to learn from Chef Ford and also the demos by other top-notch culinary leaders. Please visit acfchefs.org and click on events to register now for the ACF Summit and ACF National Convention in Las Vegas this July. So on behalf of the ACF National Office, thank you again to New Hampshire and Massachusetts ProStart and your schools for tuning in today. Thank you, of course, to the amazing pastry chef Jessica Craig for bringing us this delicious learning opportunity right in time for Valentine's Day. And thank you for tuning in today. We hope to see you all soon. Have a great day.